We're gonna call this meeting to order. Rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I need a motion to adopt the agenda. Well, you have to do the roll.
Actually, we'll do roll call and that works. Nope.
Okay. Commissioner Hawes is coming in remote. Are you there? Not yet. We'll come back to you when you get. Commissioner Stefani is excused. Commissioner Starr,
Here.
Commissioner Meyer here, Commissioner Wynn,
Here.
Commissioner Howard,
Here.
Commissioner Cruz here, Commissioner Schultz
Here.
and Commissioner Sprigga.
Here.
And do we see anybody?
No,
Okay.
we'll keep on it. All right, so we need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Starr and a second by Commissioner Cruz to adopt the agenda. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And is there anybody here for public comment? All right. So we have the consent agenda. Number one, approve June minutes of regular meeting, June 17th, 2026. Number two, approve June bills. Number three, approve grants and donations. Sawyer staff appreciation activities. $40 Madison Avenue Market, $40 Novel Bay Booksellers, $50 Fatso's, $40 McDonald's, $125 Healthy Way Market, $20 Target. $100,000 anonymous donation for elementary playground. Support the school lunch program for families who struggle to pay meal balances. $300 St. Paul Lutheran Church Fish Creek and $100 Sioux Plain. For Sawyer Playground, $250 Hughes Funeral Home. And the following Raybrook grants were received: Jennifer A. Nielsen Arthur presentation and resource organizer for high school, middle school art program. Number four, accept resignations. Desiree Lambrecht is resigning from her associate position at Sawyer School. Beth Halstead is resigning from her grade 6 through 12 choir teaching position. Number five, accept seclusion and restraint annual report. Act 125 requires that schools report annually to the school board by September 1st about any incidents from the previous school year. Most incidents of seclusions and restraint in school districts typically occur at elementary level. District Ferry has approved or prepared the annual report summarizing the information from the past year with a small number of students. That report is included in the meeting packet. A motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented is recommended.
I move to approve the consent agenda items. Second.
And we have a motion by Commissioner Sprigga and seconded by Commissioner Schultz. All those in favor?
Aye.
What was it?
Sorry, just if there was any further discussion.
Oh, yes, further discussion. I bet. Opposed? Motion carried.
Operations, I can hop in. First one, consent agenda items requiring attention, if any, right? We didn't have any items pulled from consent for tonight. As you also know, consent was not nearly as long as it was in June, as Commissioner Wind and I were joking before the meeting, right? June, as some of you are getting into this process a little more often, more years into your service, right? June is typically the longest board packet of the year, but largely because it's the longest consent agenda of the year, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a long meeting, as we saw. All right. So for tonight, we really have kind of one faculty approval, if you will, and this is someone who has been working for us, right? As you see in the description there, really going from part-time to full-time. And we can pull Director Berry in if someone has a question before we approve. And obviously Jake in the business office is aware of this or was from the get-go. So now I'll go to the notes. Approving a full-time speech pathologist. Director of Special Education Pupil Services, Lindsay Ferry, is pleased to recommend Brooklyn Pursley for a full-time speech and language pathologist position. Brooklyn was previously employed for us as a part-time speech and language pathologist. due to an increase in caseload numbers and early referrals for speech and language services. It's recommended to move Brooklyn from a part-time employee to a full-time employee. A motion to approve Brooklyn personally as a full-time employee beginning with the 2026-2027 school year is recommended.
I'll move to approve Brooklyn personally to the full-time employee beginning 2026-27 school year.
Second. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Sturgeon and second by Commissioner Schultz. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, we'll go on to number 3. We have 2 support staff or teacher associates, as we know, we refer to them in our district. First of all, 3A, a part-time special education teacher associate for Michaela Yant, Director of Special Education and Pupil Services, Director Lindsay Ferry, and Principal Katie DeVillers are pleased to recommend Michaela Yant as a part-time special education teacher associate working with first and second grade teams over at Sawyer Elementary. Michaela had previously worked with children at the Door County Child Development Center as a floating teacher, which allowed her to gain valuable experience with children of all ages. Michaela is excited to join the Sawyer team as a part-time associate. Will no doubt use her skills to support all children throughout Sawyer School. A motion to approve Michaela Yant as a part-time special education teacher associate at Sawyer beginning with the 2026-27 school year is recommended.
Make a motion to approve Michaela Yant, is it Michaela? Michaela Yant as a part-time special education teacher associate at Sawyer School, beginning with the 2026-2027 school year.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Starr and seconded by Commissioner Cruz to approve Michaela Yant. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, and 3B, the other teacher associate position tonight before us, Evelyn Charney, Director of Special Education Pupil Services, Lindsay Ferry is pleased to recommend Evelyn Charney as a new special education teacher associate for Rebound Door County, some of our alternative programming. Evelyn has previously been employed by the Door County Child Development Center as a teacher. While working for the child care, Evelyn earned her associate's degree in early childhood programming from NWTC. Evelyn has a great personality with friendly disposition that will no doubt support the students enrolled at Rebound Door County throughout the school year. A motion to approve Evelyn Charney as a special education teacher associate at Rebound Door County program beginning with the 2026-27 school year is recommended.
I move to approve Evelyn Charney as a special education teacher associate at Rebound Door County program beginning with the 26-27 school year.
Seconded.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Cruz and seconded by Commissioner Howard to approve Evelyn Charney as a special education teacher associate at Rebound Door County. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Next up, approving a Fund 46 transfer, and again, you've heard about this before, but in different conversations, it was thought, let's bring it forward as an item and board can choose how to proceed from here. So, and I will summarize this, especially for anyone listening here in person or online, since the board's heard a little more about this in the past. As we've discussed in the past, including different times this last year, Fund 46 is a long-term maintenance project account that is funded by transfers, usually at the end of the fiscal year from Fund 10. Next paragraph, next page. Earlier this spring, the board had approved an updated long-term maintenance plan, which is required for Fund 46. In addition, when the district budget was approved back in October, the board approved a budget of $180,000 to be transferred to Fund 46 for future capital projects. In addition, as part of the principal's building budgets that were approved, we plan to transfer any remaining amounts from those budgets to Fund 46 for those building specific or principal led projects. While there is no requirement for the board to approve the final year-end transfer to Fund 46, which has to happen before the end of July, during some conversations about Fund 46 between a board member and the administration this past winter and spring, it was agreed that the board should at least have the opportunity to formally approve the transfer. With all that said, it's preparation of the background document. Again, Jake put these notes together for us. While we know that 180,000 was approved as part of the budget back in October, there were a couple items that were still uncertain, as he updated this last week. There was the timing of us receiving and then being able to reconcile and record credit card bills. I didn't have the final carryover numbers for the building budgets as a result of that early last week with the packet preparation. You also see the note about the monthly year-to-date reports, which again could be done. And then point two, also possibility it makes sense to transfer more than the original budgeted $180,000 for general long-term maintenance projects. Again, because of the timing of credit card bills and other bills as noted in the parenthetical explanation. Any potential recommendation for additional funds transfer wouldn't be ready until we got closer to the board meeting, as business manager Holtz wrote. So finishing the notes for now, then I'll pause and can turn to Jake and any others for that matter. We will have an amount to transfer along with a recommended motion if the board chooses to take formal action when we get to that point in the meeting, which is right now. Business manager Holtz, do you want to fill it? Normally we would do a motion and a second, but since it's one of those things, there may or may not be the board need for a motion and a second. Why don't you fill us in a little bit more as follow-up to these notes?
So in front of you, I also emailed it on Thursday. You have printed off the updates, updated information for the individual school building transfer, recommended transfer. And then the total transfer there, keeping the long-term, the budgeted amount at 180,000. It's not something that by statute we have to do. There was a question earlier this year. Whether the board could do that, absolutely you can if you guys would like to. And so when talking to Dan, put it on the agenda for an opportunity. That if you want to approve the $214,271.21 to transfer to Fund 46, we can certainly do that.
So presumably Fund 46 is growing year over year because we do these transfers.
Correct.
What will that bring us to?
I have that. So we're at 259 as we sit right now. So add the 214, 475.
And we have quite a few projects coming up, so
Right.
like I'm glad that you brought this to us so
Right.
that we could see it
Sure.
transparently, and then the public can too.
Yeah.
Right, and to grow that for a specific purposes. Instead of practice, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of it, if you haven't noticed, so.
So I can make a motion.
Well, I don't, other people may wanna. I certainly can if we wanna be there.
Doesn't hurt anything. So,
Sure.
yeah, I don't, yeah.
I don't wanna prematurely do that if someone else had some other discussion about it.
We can discuss after.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So here, let's keep it moving. I'll make a motion to approve the 2026 year-end transfer of $214,271.21 from Fund 10 to Fund 46.
Second.
Second by Star. All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Spritka and seconded by Commissioner Star on transferring $214,271.21 from Fund 10 to Fund 46. Is there any discussion?
I just don't know if I heard you mention it, but the reason it went from 180 to 214 is because of the rollover amounts from the different programs. So for those watching on.
Yep.
Line, they did not hear or can't see this. So.
Sure.
Yeah,
historically, right, districts do that different ways. Some, it's kind of the, what's the not so official way to say it, use it or lose it, right? Which then sometimes causes buildings or principals, right, to say, well, I don't know if we really need this, but if we're gonna lose it, we might purchase XYZ, right? Having some sort of carryover, and again, different terminology is used, but carryover typically makes sense to people. I think is a wise practice because it encourages kind of prudence at the building level for the principal and their teachers, especially if they say, hey, we're trying to, and again, one of the examples we've used many times, since it was a classic example when I was new, was when then middle school principal Randy Watermolen, right, had saved up unused budget funds to be able to then get a match from a key grant entity in the county to then get new bleachers for TJ Walker Middle School without him having to come from district maintenance or others, and really also to leverage kind of saved up dollars and then double them through a grant to get them, you know, in a really, I guess you'd say, fiscally responsible way. So we've tried to do that in similar ways. And again, Jake's tried a couple of different ways to try to track it, make sure that works with the schools, principals, and the board. And this is kind of the current path we're on, which again, to me, seems to make sense, but it's always a nice thing to be able to talk about. So it's transparent, as was pointed out. And so the funds are used properly.
Well, and I think the accounting practices, if we put these funds into one-time projects, we don't create the structural deficit for something else.
Right.
Right, so. Accounting wise, I think it completely makes sense.
Good points.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor,
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries.
All right, number 5, the strategic action plan and priorities draft for the 26-27 school and fiscal year. As you know, in July, that's an informational item, so no action is going to be needed, right? You've seen the format now, how many years in a row? I took off the introduction because it was starting to get so old because it dated back to, I think, 2017, just as far as how we've had these priority buttons, right? So again, for anyone tracking this, I think we'll have the board, if formal adoption or formal blessing, if you will, to this in the August board meeting prior to the school year, right? And really this helps us focus on particular areas, right? So the 3 big buckets, teaching and learning, which ultimately, I won't read through all of these, is where we want our teachers and principals to focus the majority of their time, the majority of the day, week, month, and year, right? So those key 3 areas are highlighted there in the teaching and learning priority bucket. Second, also very important, especially in this day and age with school and community operations and relations, community engagement. So those 2 items, right, that's where perhaps someone like in my position or the board, right, where we work a little more closely with this, as opposed to having teachers and principals lead that first section. So updating stakeholders is kind of that first bullet point. We try to have some variation of this every year. And then the second one, I really focused it this year, because some years we've had different number of bullet points. It's kind of anywhere from 1 to 3 typically. I focused that specifically on what the board's really been talking about a lot, especially going back to as recently as the spring and currently this summer, around the community survey, advisory work group session, which we know we're planning for August 5th, and communicating with the community about the upcoming educational programming operational referendum, right? Where we had thought about where does that go? As we know, while the board hasn't had to approve a resolution yet, went until next month, that we're currently targeting November 3rd with that state general election. So that was the focus there. And then the third area, which again, going back to the beginning with that board retreat, was ultimately going to be 2 different areas, but we combined them into one: finance, facilities, and operations. The first of the 2 bullet points, focusing again, as we typically do, on variations of that short and long-term budget planning process, bearing in mind we are, like a number of other districts, in an operational referendum cycle, and how do we work and monitor and cut and communicate accordingly to really make this work. And then the second bullet point, really a district like ours, right? It's all about people, working with our young people. So how do we attract and retain quality staff? And then we've looked at different things around growth, improvement, leadership. We've talked about different aspects of compensation, especially on the professional staff or kind of teacher side of things, around topics such as, but not limited to, salary ladder, the PTO shift, right? We've worked through most of that, but we still have a couple nuggets hoping to get those taken care of soon. The health insurance strategy, right? Where we engaged a new broker I know Jake and Brenda had a Zoom meeting with the Howden team today, and we have a strategy meeting coming up in August to really position us. And again, while there's more, those are the items that I've included here. We certainly could tweak that further, and Jake and I have talked about doing so. And I think ultimately, kind of the obvious elephant in the room, as you and I know, and anyone else hopefully is becoming more and more aware with the operational referendum, that some of these topics, right, although primed and ready for attention, ultimately would wait until we know more about the outcome of what we project to be a November 3rd election. So that is, again, in a nutshell, three main areas as we review every year. This also helps us be focused and not chase after too many different, maybe worthwhile and well-intentioned, but different things throughout the year, which of course is a distraction to staff, administration, and so if you have anything, I welcome it now. Otherwise, if you think of something, you want to shoot it my way here in the next week, the admin team and I can take a final look and tweak this. You'll see either something that looks exactly like this or extremely similar to this in next month's meeting. That's all I have for you on that one. All right, the next one, and we really haven't had much conversation at the high curriculum level on this, but if you look, number 6, approve annual public notice of academic standards, right? So we haven't, Director Weber and the principals and the teachers, right, haven't redone all standards or curriculum, but this is the required annual notice. So I won't read this whole section to you. I'll just hit a few high points for those interested. And the board sees this every year. I will read that first sentence though, to start with. The 2015 to 2017 state budget, also known as 2015 Wisconsin Act 55, added several notice requirements for school districts, right? So noticing these academic standards, now I'll summarize rather than read those several paragraphs to you, is one of a number of things that popped up. And as Mrs. Demise and I monitor each year and work with the other districts in the county on a joint notice and posting right, I think that list seems to grow every year about things that we have to give notice to. But this is one of those things. All right, I will jump down to the last 2 short paragraphs. We include a link to the DPI website and academic standards, right? And before I go to the motion, I will say, as it's noted in that longest paragraph, the 4th paragraph, that we call these Sturgeon-based standards. If you think back several years, whether you were on the board or not, you heard different things about Common Core and other things that at the national level, there were some concerns about specifics, especially of whether it was science curriculum or whatnot, right? So what a lot of different districts talked about is said, okay, we can use those kind of model academic standards at the state level, but if we call them our own, if a concern ever comes up, we're not married only to a federal or state thing, right? A school district can get together and tweak those as the local school community seems appropriate. So at that time, we came up with the Sturgeon-based standards label, and we've used it ever since. So now I'll go back to the notes in the last sentence. Simply again, that this is a notice, right? A motion to give the required annual notice pertaining to academic standards utilized here in the school district of Sturgeon Bay for the 2026-27 school year is recommended.
I'll make a motion to give the required annual notice pertaining to academic standards utilized in the school district of Sturgeon Bay for the 2026-2027 school year.
Second.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Starr and seconded by Commissioner Cruz on our annual notice pertaining to academic standards. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor,
Aye.
opposed, motion carries.
Next up, I know always a highlight of our summer meetings when we bring to you a few board policy reviews, right? As you've seen in an email from Mrs. Demise, so our policy partner, right, majority of districts in the state partner with Neola, right? The software that has been used, right, it's called Board Docs in the past. We're now switching to new ones. There's an implementation when districts have access. So that's why Ann used, I forget if we call it an old school approach, right, which was a little clunky on our end. So we apologize. It doesn't look quite as clean as typical, but we thought there was a few of these we didn't want to wait another month on. Since some of these, we're technically supposed to be done in July, we thought we'll get a jump on this fairly short list compared to what you see most summers, and we'll go into that. Before I also go to the background document 7A, I will just read part of a little bit of context. So there's 2 things going on, and again, you saw a little bit of that communication, and it comes through in some of the summaries. So again, I'm just going to talk off of the notes before going to those. So there's an Act 57 update, and an Act 89 update. Ultimately, what we did, and I'll just give you the high points on what each of those stand for. We put the two together to save some steps and some processes. And here's kind of what each is, just so you know. So really, Act 57 ultimately focuses on new requirements for school districts regarding notifying parents when a report of sexual misconduct by a staff member is received. You would have seen some of this in the news last year, right? Not necessarily locally, but at the state level, right? There were different things about was that communication happening quickly enough or not? So legislation was passed under Act 57 to make sure of that. I'll hit one more note on Act 57 for now. Act 57 mandates a timely response requiring notification either by 5 p.m. the same day if a report is received during school hours, or by noon the following day if received, after school hours. Additionally, it requires school districts to provide parents with annual information regarding the right to access school employee disciplinary records under Wisconsin Public Records Law, so kind of a notice piece. The other piece I will highlight on this before going to Act 89, Act 57 deals specifically, because it's happening so quickly, right? And the investigation will not have been wrapped up yet. It deals specifically with notifying parents of a child directly involved, right? So it wouldn't be a case, not to make light of it, but I'm like a school or a snow day thing, right? Where I'm communicating to all district families, right? It wouldn't be all district families get a communication. It would be specifically, right, the parent or parents or guardians, whatever the situation, if there's a child that is involved in an alleged sexual misconduct situation with some sort of staff there, right? So then obviously there wouldn't be typically more communication until more is known about what is or isn't the case, right? So in a nutshell, that's Act 57. Act 89, although related, a little bit different. This really deals with all public and private schools in our state adopting policies governing appropriate communication between employees, volunteers, and students, both during and outside school hours, with, again, a deadline at the start of this next school year. You see, there's a couple pieces about training and then consequences. I'll give you this example. Many of you are parents or have been recently or school staff. So we used to use an app called Hasia. Now, under John Dupuy's leadership, right, we've shifted to Sports U. And so what it is, right, that's a specific mechanism, as you know, right, where the trap team uses it, music department, athletic teams. This is how coaches communicate with players or kids involved, parents. So there isn't private text messaging, which then can go down a different path in very rare instances, sadly in our state and others, right? And then grooming and some of these other things. Sadly, we see these terrible stories in the news come up, right? So Act 89 kind of deals with, hey, there's certain ways you communicate or not. I use that app just as a practical example of something that our district understands, because we've been doing that now for several years, right? So that's kind of how it goes. And really, I'll just finish kind of with these couple of sentences. Act 89 has a lot of overlap with Act 57. And what also happened, as Ann and I have learned, is that some of the policy language, which was first optional when the Act 57 stuff came out, later became required by the time Act 89 happened. So we took two different updates. And rather than have a 4-month process, we're trying to boil that down to 2. All right, so we're trying to make it more efficient and have you have to read through some of the same stuff less often. So there's kind of the background, and with that, I'll kind of jump right into some of the high points. And again, as usual, I'm not going to read every one of these for now. This is the first reading, so you don't take formal action tonight. The second reading would typically be part of consent next month. All right, so 7A, policy 0145, again, dealing with Act 89, really deals with the digital realities of social media and instant communication, as you see near the end of that kind of second sentence. And I'll jump down a couple more lines about creating necessary safeguards for any level of interaction, whether board to student in this example, or you'll see the other employee groups with students later that don't, again, undermine public transparency. Moving on to 7B, policies 1213, 3213, and 4213. And remember, that just deals with the different employee groups, right? That's what the different series are. This deals with establishing a standard of care to protect student safety by clearly defining behaviorally boundaries for all staff. And again, dealing with that Act 57, that updated language mandates that parents must be notified of sexual misconduct reports by 5 p.m. on the same day, or noon the next day if the report comes in after school. Again, I touched on that already, but that's an important point of a lot of these updates. And again, some of that media coverage. I'll jump down to the third paragraph since I did mention a term like grooming, right? Or it talks about boundary violations, I think used in maybe a different way than some of that in the past, right? Talking about what are definitions of those situations that can unfortunately later lead down the road to inappropriate contact in rare instances between a young person and adult. I'll go on to 7C, policy 5136, dealing with personal communication devices. I will jump to early in the second paragraph on this one, right? This just deals with that requirement under Act 42 requiring each school board to adopt technically by July 1. We had a few things in motion, as you know, in May and June that bumped it back to how that would work with different communication pieces. I will say partially because he's one of our audience members today, John Dupuy has been talking with multiple people for us and bringing that back to both Mark Smellin and myself about what the preference is. The tricky part, Ann and I had trying to take all that information and what you see in your packet is we often think of the older kids, the high school kids, but the reality is both middle school and both elementary schools have a more restrictive policy that's been working very well for them. So we thought, okay, while it can't happen right during instructional time, as has been stated in Madison, before school, after school, passing times, lunch with the older kids, right? At this point, we thought, okay, let's stay there with alignment. But at the same time, I think it was the beginning of the second paragraph. I think we came up with the sentence, like at the same time, right? The middle school and elementary schools can have more restrictive rules because it's been working well for them. All right. So in a nutshell, that's that. Policy 753002. Again, a little more communication dealing with, I'll jump to the second short paragraph, oversight of digital interactions by requiring use of district sanctioned communication platforms for student related correspondence. And again, this is like what I talked about with Asia and Sport 2. 754002, really replacement dealing with digital content and accessibility. You've heard Jen Weber talk about this over the months, right? I'm going to jump to the middle of paragraph 2. Really, it's about making web contact and mobile applications accessible to all, including individuals with disabilities, right, who may not be able to see certain things or certain colors on the website, making sure that that's accessible. So really, that's what that deals with. 754003, student technology be acceptable use and safety. This one gets updated regularly over the years. I'll go to about that second paragraph with Act 89 again, which mandates that school boards define appropriate content for interaction between staff and students. Next up, G, policy 7544, excuse me, another one with Act 89 and the use of social media. I will go to early that second paragraph about the requirement to define appropriate contact for digital communication, address that staff and student interactions, similar to language we've seen elsewhere. Policy 8120 with volunteers, this comes up from time to time. I'll go to the second paragraph, right, with volunteers. We're often talking about background checks, and our district has a pretty good process for that, which Mrs. Demise in most cases leads. Second paragraph here again deals with that appropriate content that yes, it doesn't just apply to school staff, it also applies to volunteers about appropriate communication with students. 8462 deals with both Acts 57 and Act 89, child abuse and neglect. I'll jump down to the beginning of the second paragraph, dealing with that parent notification for alleged sexual misconduct or unauthorized student representation as well, required by the law. So again, we've talked about this a couple of different times. The parent communication part is the one that gets the most press. Oh, and that is the last one. Sorry, I was thinking I had one more at the top of the next page. So those are our first readings. If something pops up or later you have a question, even if it's not tonight, again, just reach out to me. Those will come back in second reading form, and perhaps you'll even get to see what the new software looks like by August, right? And, that's right. Anne has training tomorrow. I know it's very exciting. We would love to join her. I think I have a meeting at that time. Sure. So that's what we have. Acting Commissioner, Acting President Wynn, should I just keep going to the next one? I would. All right. Next up, probably more interesting one. You've seen a little information from me because of the Zoom meeting I had this week with Bill Foster and his team at School Perceptions. But we've got the informational update tonight regarding replacement educational programming operational referendum information currently being planned for November 3rd. I thought what I would do for the record, especially even for those maybe that watch the recording later, I will hit probably 4 of these paragraphs as they're in the notes, and 2 of them, because we now have updated information, I'll go off script and then end up, after I cover the notes, right, I'll talk through a handful of the key slides from the preliminary results. All right, so I'll start with this for the record, even though I know the board has seen some of this many times. As we shared last month, while no formal board action needs to occur until August, we want to have a standing board agenda item that deals with our upcoming replacement educational programming operational referendum. As you know, the current 5-year operational referendum was approved by voters back in April of 2022, and it expires on June 30th of 2027. Next paragraph. Board currently plans to approve a resolution in our August 19th, 2026 regular Board of Education meeting to go to voters as part of the general election occurring this fall on November 3rd, 2026. As you know, we worked with school perceptions again to assemble a community survey that landed in mailboxes in late June. Survey asked community members to respond by the deadline, June 8th. I want to thank everyone for the record who responded. We had very nice response, as you will see here, from all sorts of members of our community. As with our last 2 community surveys we've conducted, community members were invited to participate either electronically or via a paper survey. As you also know, school perceptions oversees those results in that process, right? That isn't overseen by us, so there's no concern about skewing results or whatnot. Third paragraph. We also talked recently about adding a special board work session a couple of different nights. So first of all, August 5th at 5 p.m. and then adding another one on August 12th. I'll circle back to that a little bit later. We'll have a little information, as we know, for the board, so you can invite some folks to the August 5th session, and then we'll review some things August 12th, including Ann and I will be in contact with Quarles and Brady so they can have some draft language for what that referendum resolution would be like, since some of you have gone through that process and some of you haven't yet. The 4th paragraph talks a little bit about the survey. I'm going to skip that for now because I can get into preliminary results here in just a couple more minutes. I'll go back to paragraph 5 of the notes. As we've discussed, right, the board and administration, we plan to continue to have updates for the community each month as a part of our regular meeting materials. Additionally, we've begun to update a variety of documents, actually. And here I specifically mentioned that 10-page frequently asked questions document, which I think is on to page 12 by now, as well as an abbreviated 2-page document, right? So we've had those, and for past referendum, they're still on our website. We kept them up there, but we're updating them for this. And again, we want those ready as things continue to progress through the summer. So that can be pushed out as soon as possible after the board would take action in August. Then the last paragraph that talks a little bit about that, I think I'm going to finish with that, with those sheets we have for you for tonight to be able to share as well, rather than read what you have already seen multiple times. So for now, what I'm going to do kind of at the end of the notes, why don't I jump to again, I've got it this way. We've got it, some of the folks around here, and if any of our guest owner, I think we've got copies for you too, so you can follow along, all right? Thank you to Mrs. Demise for getting that already. So your version would have 4 kind of pages or slides per page. Again, the board has that electronically. Anyone who wants to electronically, I can share with you, even though it's preliminary, and I'll start with why. So of all the pages, I'm going to flip through them, but I'm really just going to focus on 5 tonight, right? Keep it brief, keep it on the main stuff, and then we'll hear more about it from the friends at School Perceptions on August 5th. So first I'm going to go to what ultimately 1, 2, what's that, 1, 2, 3, it's the 4th slide, where it just says some survey information. Yeah. It just gives a highlight of the deadline. And what I want to highlight tonight is as of July 13th, so that was Monday when I had a Zoom with 3 gentlemen from School Perceptions, we had 809 responses. Now, we know on Monday, the survey had already closed, but the reason we expect at least a few more than 809 is because of the people's ability to mail those in, right? So Bill Foster had actually over his shoulder, he had the day's mail in the office. He's like, I'm not sure which of these yet are from Sturgeon Bay or which are from other districts, but we anticipate that to creep up slightly. And really what he told me ultimately, because we had 809 responses, right? Very solid response, especially for a Door County summer, right? And probably double what they'd like to have as far as getting good results. They typically have said in the past, if we get at least 400, we can get a community results. In our case, having twice that many, 800, we're happy with that. Really what he said is that statistical margin for error. I know it was interesting how many years ago when we did the first one, really only 400, they've got the math behind it. So we're happy to have more than twice that many. But what'll happen, he said, your overall results really aren't gonna change, even if several more come in the mail, but the statistical margin for error probably will get even tighter. I could probably have Mr. Wind explain that if we, so, there we go, right, as that gets bigger, exactly. So that was the first slide I wanted to highlight. Now I'm gonna jump ahead several slides, and then I'll hold it up so you know which one I'm looking at. Ultimately, what I'm talking about is the question. All right, it's gonna look like this. It's gonna be, it says at the top, additional analysis, operational referendum support, and it's really the one that deals with second question of the survey, the first amount, the 3.5 billion. All right, and I can read it to you even if you're not sure which one it is. It's no problem. It's the one that says operational referendum support at the top, and then the bottom says weighted support for definitely yes and probably yes. And what they do is they take different members of the community and they weight that, right? So they take their assumptions. Again, this is based off of many, many surveys they've done. And they say, and then I'll back up from here, that they would project 60.0 support, right? So 60% passage rate based on what is currently known, right? With nothing major happening in the community the next few months, for the question that was the example of 3.5 million. All right. And as you look at that, right, they take out people that aren't residents. All right. They're focusing especially on parent residents and non-parents, non-staff, or what I talked to the board about in June, right? The filtered responses, right? Which is a majority of the community. They don't work for school, they don't have a kid in school, but they make up a critical part of our voting public. And putting those two together, they call what the weighted support would be at 60%. Now I'm going to jump forward to the next question, the 3.75 million. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides ahead. It's all, yes, it's going to say employee compensation increase at the top. This is the third of the 5 slides I'm going to highlight. Ultimately, you know, board members, right? This is the 3.5 base, what we needed to question, right? Plus the additional 250,000, right? So the second of the 3 amounts tested that then says 59.4% at the bottom, right? So taking the base 3.5 needed for operations, saying, okay, community, those of you taking the survey, what would you think about an additional $250,000 per year for a total of 3.75, right? We work with school perceptions to make that very clear. What would you think about that? And you see a very, very similar, not identical, but very similar outcome. Rather than the 60% of projected support using their weighted calculation, they came in very close at 59.4, right? So to recap this part, okay, the 3.5 million, how did respondents feel? 60% support for that. What about the 3.75 million? 59.4% for that. And again, I know some of you have reached out to me. It's that, pretty easy to follow and clear as far as what a number of the community members are telling us. Now let's jump to the last question. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides further. This is where it says on top, additional analysis, building maintenance increase. This is the fourth of the 5 slides I want to highlight tonight, right? This is that total of 4 million, right? So we've talked a ton about maintenance. In fact, we actually talked a little bit about it tonight. We said, well, what, we're going to continue to do maintenance regardless, but what would the community think about even some additional maintenance on top of our current plans, right? The 3.5 base, the 250,000 for staff compensation, and an additional 250,000 for maintenance. And that's where you see the drop off, right? Community's pretty clear on that. That's a 50-50 coin flip, right? Because of the margin for error, it shows 50.8% support. But because of that margin for error, one could argue, is it really just under 50%? Is it really just over 50%? That's where, in talking with school perceptions, and any of you or a community member looking at this would be, okay, pretty solid support for the other two, right? Statistically, percentage-wise, even a little higher than our previous operational referendum survey. But in this case, definitely is dropping off, right? So that is much more of a coin flip and would, theoretically jeopardize the question. Then if you flip one more, this is one I easily would skip by simply because of the focus on the referendum. But when Bill Foster, or it might be Rob Demise, either Bill and or Rob plan to be here on August 5th for our work session to present to us the finalized report once all the mailed in ballots are here and give you their expertise, since they work with districts across the state to do this all the time. They said, do not skip over this, Dan. This is really important to us because we see in communities where overall satisfaction can impact a referendum outcome, which really does make sense. So they paused and spent time on this. So really on a scale of 1 to 10, the Sturgeon Bay score was 7.19. Now, of course, we're all competitive. We would like to see a 10 there, but we understand, right? This is the world we live in. It's not going to happen. Okay. Then this next part I'll explain. And I emailed this to you, but I'll explain to our guests as well. Comparison score of 6.56. So how they generate that is they take 25 similar size districts. I think it's size, not just demographic, but size. And they say, okay, how do their results compare? Sturgeon Bay, how do you compare? And again, if the average result for that group of 25 districts, they have us lumped in as 6.56, they give us a 7.19, which puts us in the 87th percentile. And the way Bill Foster would say, and then you would spot check with a community member he knows that he went to college with. Okay, what are the high level impressions of the district, the superintendent, the school board, which he then spot checked and would say, okay, you're in a good place. Even though, of course, we would strive to be even higher yet. So again, focus, I know, on the questions, and I'll pause just in a moment for any comments, questions you have, and then that satisfaction data. Again, by August 5th, if not sooner, we should have the finalized report. So it's 809 responses right as of Monday. We'll see what the final ends up being. And again, we know, at least from the chair I sit in as your superintendent, right, knowing how the community feels really has been a recipe that has worked well the last couple of times, because then now we're not asking for something that does not align with what a majority of the community is telling us, right? And we've seen that both on the capital referendum side and on our last operational referendum side. So let me take a breath, get a drink of water. I invite board comments, questions, or even dialogue based on your take on the preliminary results. Or maybe you don't have any.
I'm just wondering, if the questions were separated into a sum of money for the teacher comp in the building, if that would have been responded to differently, if they were broken out to, $500,000 and $500,000. No, 250 and 250, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I know what you mean.
I'm just wondering if, when it goes from 3.5 to 4, if that's the scary number for people. It's like, can we pick between one or the other, or is it an all or none situation?
Yeah, ultimately, two things pop to mind, and then Jake was in on some of those Zoom meetings with me in case I'm missing anything. Ultimately, right, the board uses this to inform what we eventually put into the question. Right, so we would not be limited to asking only exactly the wording, if you will, and again, referendum wording, right, has the legalese in there, it's going to be slightly different anyway. So ultimately, okay, if it's the 3.5, the 3.75, the 4, well, probably not 4, right? So somewhere in that 3.5, 3.75 sweet spot, what we specifically want to articulate in there, ultimately the board can do, if I'm hitting on part of that point correctly, Jake. And then the next part, when we had the Zoom with, or one of the several with school perceptions, what we were struggling with, and that's where it's nice to work with a company that literally does this for a living, right? Because part of the problem when districts do it themselves is they sometimes end up with data that doesn't necessarily help the board as much as they want it to, right? So if we didn't prioritize one of those amounts or items over the other, then school perceptions was saying like, okay, you might get a response that says the community is open to 3.75, for example, but if we didn't articulate, say, staff compensation as the first priority is how Jake and I figured the group would look at it, right? And then the maintenance piece. If you don't at least articulate that, here's the order. What you could do is you could split some of your respondents, if you will, when they say, well, I was open to 3.75, but I didn't want the staff compensation, I wanted the maintenance. And someone said, well, I wanted the staff compensation, not the maintenance. So he said, really, I think what you guys need to do on behalf of the district, right, and ultimately, right, the board had the final say, but you have to put those in an order or else the data may not help. But yeah, great point. Did I miss anything with that, Jake, from what you recall? But yeah, it's because you never know. We can only word it how we can word it, right? There's always a different way. But yeah, other thoughts, questions, comments.
That point too, maybe I'm off base, but somebody could read that and think that you're putting $500,000 into building maintenance, right? Because it's not stating that in addition to the 250. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but I think that somebody could think that you're actually asking for $500,000 for the building maintenance, because just because you're asking it afterwards, most people would stack it to get to that 500, but somebody could just think, oh, in this question, they're asking if we would put 500,000 to building maintenance, not the 250.
I think, see what Bill says and feel, again, that's part of why they like to come in and give a presentation, provided districts want it, which we do. In talking with him, part of it also came down to, you know, kind of not only those amounts, right, and how you word it, and not only it getting actionable, but like, how do you pick it up? Because we talked about, is it 350 in the one case or 250, right? And then we thought, well, keep it simple. Plus Jake said, no, the 250 would definitely be a benefit to the community. And then we didn't want people confused, but by picking a 250 and a 250, to your point, Andy, right? Well, that can confuse people. And I think the last thing that comes to mind now, which took a moment there, Bill would say when people are taking the survey, whether on their phones, you know, or on a computer, right, device or paper, honestly, they don't read that carefully until they get to the question in many cases. Right,
Sure.
so there's an intro, well, kind of like we talked when we met the other day, right? There's the intro, what do you think in general about referendum, right? And most people are like, oh, I wish us included, we didn't need to do it, right?
Yep.
So the number was fairly positive, but actually the first question, right, those questions were higher.
Yep.
When we actually said, well, it would be this much, and then people are like, oh, well, that's the impact, I can get behind it, which is kind of an
The
interesting.
general
dynamic.
referendum question had a lower response rate than the specific
Yeah.
dollar amount question.
I would put that a little bit to what people in my line of work often hear with the Gallup polls. Right, so when the Gallup polls are done nationwide and they say, well, what do you think of public education in this country? People typically, I don't know, I have some real concerns. You know, C, you know, whatever. But what do you think of the public, you know, educational system in your community? Oh, overall, I'm in support. They're doing good work. Yeah, it's hard, but you know, I give them an A or a B. So it's just, in general, people think a certain way, but when you get more specific, and especially like in this case, like we talked about, Andy, right? If you're just asking about a referendum, someone might be saying, well, I don't know how much you're gonna ask for. I'm not so sure. And then when we tell you like, okay, what about this amount and how it equates to the current amount, then they can say, okay, now that gives me something to ponder, especially with proposed tax rates, and they can insert their own property value. Other good points. Or questions. And remember, part of why we try to add that layer of the advisory group, right? We're having you know, invite a few folks in, right? Everybody's busy. I understand that. We don't need meetings to have meetings, but it's also a chance for you then to ask folks who don't necessarily work for you, like Jake and I do, right? Like, hey, given these results and what you know, like in general, what do you think? What advice do you have for us as a board? And that's the last couple of times we've done that. That's gone well. It's been very productive. Anything else on that one for now? Otherwise, certainly more to come. All right. I think we can keep clicking and head on to reports. I tried, little segue there. Start. Legislative wise, I know, in fact, this came up in our conversation the other day, Andy, too, maybe for everyone's benefit. You know, is there any other talk happening in Madison about a budget repair bill? I think there are people that have said, we'd like to see something happen, but let's be honest. Until the governor's election happens, it's probably not gonna happen, right? It'd probably be a similar outcome to last time, where some agree, some don't, right? And I think in general, right, the Republican legislators would say, hey, we want to see if Tom Tiffany is elected, which we hope he is, in which case then we want him to have control over that money, is how they in general are going to respond, right? And the Democrats, same way, right? Democrats are going to say, hey, they don't necessarily know who for sure their candidate is yet, but they want to say, hey, we want our candidate to have access to that money and do things accordingly. So that's where I think between now and the November election, and again, as Andy and I were talking, and Andy, feel free to add on to this when I finish too. Until the next governor is known and has a chance to work through the process, I really don't think anything else is happening. Anything you'd add there?
I just continue to try to think of play the devil's advocate and think of the obstacles that might come our way, the tough questions that might come our way. And, one of those might be, well, you mentioned that you may not take the entire 3.5 million if you didn't need it. Well, if this big budget bill gets passed, how will you alter the 3.5 million? And so just being able to speak to that a little bit, as we get closer and are communicating work with the community.
Well, I think as we talked the other day, Andy, for the board and public, guests tonight or anyone watching the recording. It's one thing for a school district to say, a couple of different thoughts here, to say, oh, we wouldn't take the full authorized amount if we wouldn't need it. The good news in Sturgeon Bay is this board, right, and the board members before you on different occasions have done just that, right? When the full, whatever was approved amount wasn't needed, right? When you approved the budget and set the tax levy in October, didn't take that amount, right? So I think this board can say, hey, we're not just saying that we wouldn't. We have examples in the past where we haven't done that. So that's important. And then one other thing around the same conversation Andy and I were having, I thought of that Bill Foster shared with me from School Perceptions. As we were talking first at the beginning of the Zoom on Monday about our preliminary results, he said, what's interesting, Dan, is that there are very few districts that as they're looking at their next referendum ask are not increasing over the previous referendum. He gave me one example from Southeast Wisconsin and one from Dane County. It was Nicolay and Wanakee, if I recall correctly, where he said, okay, I can think of the districts I either work with or monitor. Sturgeon Bay is probably one of three right now where you said, okay, your last referendum topped out right this fiscal year at the 3.8 or 3.5 was last year. We're saying, what about continuing at 3.5 because we're trying to, make some other cuts, etc. He said that's actually probably more unique than you think. And so when Andy and I were talking, Andy said, that's a point you need to share that with the board and others, knowing that all communities, right, are local, right? You think of what your community has and what my taxes are and all the different stuff. But I think that was a positive that Bill shared that he might touch on in August too. Any other of those points, Andy, that we were talking about that we should make at least tonight?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Good. Report wise, Jake, what do you got?
Yeah, just a couple highlights here, the destination Sturgeon Bay stuff, that's been great, I think both personally and for the district so far. A lot of people eager to jump in and support the district, which is just great to feel and see. Roughing meetings, we have starting at 12:15 on July 29th. We'll have 4 different contractors, consultants in for interviews. If you guys want to come, just let me know. We already have Wayne and Andy set to join. And so if anybody else wants to join, let me know in case we can do post for a quorum. And then year end, with the payroll that hit today, we did still have a little bit of maintenance or hourly workers that are 12-month employees. It appears we're still hovering in that 115,000 surplus after tonight's approved transfer. So that's your year-end update. Otherwise, just going through a bunch of audit stuff and year-end wrapping. Thank you.
Excellent. For my report, maybe I'll just hit on one item that was in there and one item that I added today. Right, keep it moving on a smoky summer night in July, perhaps, right? I'll go to the community engagement section. Letter B deals with the Clipper Connection newsletter, right? Some of the other stuff in here we've certainly covered because of the survey and so forth. I did reach out to the Pulse earlier this month to try to start getting all 3 issues planned. And part of the reason in my mind for doing so was our fall edition. There wasn't a particular timeliness needed last year. Didn't come out until November, around their busy festival weekend in October. But I shared with them while, again, the board hasn't officially approved a resolution and won't until August. I'm quite sure that we'll be going to the voters in November, which means we really want that newsletter to be out earlier. Some of the notes and that other information I can finish with here in a moment, talk about how at least for April elections in our community, when we've talked to partners such as Myron or whatnot in the past, and they look at the Sturgeon Bay data, which I think is probably true of most of Door County, to be honest, that we have a few more early voters than typical. I realize November is a little different than April, but I think we need to make sure that we have information out, by roughly, I'm gonna say mid-October in air quotes for now. So that if someone wants to vote early, because maybe they're heading off to wherever already in November, then they've had a chance to see that information. I know there are special mailers that can be done, as we've talked in the past. Sometimes people are critical of extra mailers because of cost and so forth, right? The survey is the survey, right? We have to ask. So I really feel like if we can have at least a portion, not the whole issue by any means, of fall, which again, sometime in October, if we can have that, give updates and push people to the website so they can get informed for the referendum, that would work well. So they have acknowledged my request. They've said, all right, let's take a look at our busy fall festival weekends, and definitely, Dan, try to work with Sturgeon Bay to make sure our issue is out in time to kind of be ahead of that. So just so you're aware of that. And then I'm gonna actually finish with, I didn't know for sure when I wrote this that Mr. Dupuy was joining us tonight, but he wants to engage and learn more about with his role in the board meetings and knows the principals are invited. So I'll just hit on a little bit I added today that's in alignment with some stuff that board members we talked about this spring. So I'll just go to the notes. You haven't seen this because I just added in the additional section, like I said today. This spring, there were some concerns and questions at the board level about supervision at unique times of the day, especially if a key person isn't on campus on a given day here at the high school. So as part of various conversations occurring this summer in preparation for next year, I want to give you as board members, and again, anyone else, parents, community members, whatnot, a heads up on a few things that some of our key people have been working through. And I also want to give a thank you shout out to people like Kristen Krejcia, Lori Mellon, Jenny O'Hanley, among others, and Officer Jenner John, who I know was in the meet with John Dupuy recently as well. So one of the things being talked about that we want to implement is at the start of the day, we plan to have exterior doors locked until 7:45 to tighten up some potential safety and security situations. And they're going to have some of us key staff stationed at different locations in front, back, and by the bus entrance. Then, in a new wrinkle, after classes begin in the morning and then also after lunch, we're actually going to have Mrs. Krejcia go back by the back entrance with her computer and pass pad and whatever else she needs, right, John? And then Mrs. Mellon's going to monitor the front to take care of any attendance, passes, etc., for the occasional late teenage student.
Yes.
Right? We want to get students to class as quickly as possible. And we also want to avoid potential issues with the occasional student who might wander the halls and or not check in properly in the office. So looking at nipping that. Also want to work further with our high school staff and students regarding topics such as study hall and students who've earned excused study hall to eliminate unnecessary hallway traffic or having other students in the building without a designated place to be, right? Sometimes a student earns excused study hall, but if they say, well, I'm just going to hang out and there isn't a designated place, right? There's just, well, we haven't had a major problem. We think there are some things that need to get tightened up. So we want to kind of have that fit with other important topics. And also really, let's be honest, with the shift to the 8-period day, that adds some passing times within the day. And we want to then, how shall we say, limit the opportunity for wandering or people not being in a designated place. All right, so that's another thing that's the group's working on. And then also with the different arrangements in place for this coming year and really our strong desire to further empower the staff leadership here at the high school. The high school leadership team is going to have a special additional meeting the morning of August 11th as follow-up to our day-long meeting that team had. Mark, John, and I were obviously present as well back on June 9th. We want to fine-tune a few of these key topics and some other bigger things in preparation for the August 25th high school staff session. And we also want to empower maybe BLT members to take turns covering some of the key topics they're comfortable with. And as John and I have said, we're comfortable covering the sticky ones if there's one they don't want to cover. And we want Mark to be able to focus on running the middle school meeting in that same time slot on the other end of campus. Then as far as sessions with the student body, one of the things that we'll make sure we implement, John, Mark, and I will meet with each high school grade during periods 1 through 4. So we'll run it freshmen through seniors morning of the second day of school. We want to make sure they're in class the first day. Then we're going to meet with them right away the morning of the second day to talk about some of these updates, expectations, and so forth to make sure we get off to a strong start. So That's really what I have from you on a report standpoint. I think we have, pick blue, right? Right? All right, so the blue sheet, can I just steal one of your clip for a moment, right? What you see in front of you, and then, you know, we can just touch base briefly afterwards. I know a couple of people are like, hey, I want to invite some folks in, right? And I know some of you already been in contact about, say, 3 people to invite in. People don't want to kind of necessarily overlap and hit all the same people. Really what I did for you, and you've seen a variation of this first page before, I made a few tweaks to it the last 2 days, actually. I simplified, I pulled a few things out just to focus on what that could look like for August 5th. All right, so that's information. I tried to put in bold, but really, as you talk to some folks in the community who might have very different feelings about the referendum, which is good, right? We want to mix. August 5th, what are we asking them to commit to? We're not asking them to commit to 10 meetings, right, or several hours. I kind of put it as an hour and 45 minutes. In my mind, I'd kind of like to say an hour and a half or less would be great, but who knows what kind of dialogue there is. So that's in bold. And then also, we talked about a couple of different things, but I know as I was thinking about it and spot checking with Ann and Jake and I have talked to about, you know, fiscal information we're happy to share. We also don't want to bowl people over with too much info, right? So the board has on that second piece of paper, you have like a 5-page version you've seen for me in June learning sessions. That's too much, at least in my opinion, right? Whereas if you want to share with folks, hey, a little bit of referendum history, because sometimes people, you know, some of our community members, again, in Door County, because all the districts have an operational referendum cycle. Our county, I would say, is probably more educated than some places on the topic. But like, hey, what is the history to some of our different referendum, right? Going all the way back to whether 1998, I focused on operational referenda, but as you know, at the bottom of page 1 of that second sheet, I did include the capital referendum information, not just because it's still timely, but as you and I know and say quite often, in fact, sometimes remind people who are asking for additional things, look, the community and district is still paying for that, right? We got about 15 years worth of paying on that. I thought it's a nice chance to have that in there. And then the bottom of page 2 of that second sheet, right, just a little information like, hey, what was the most recent reassessment? And again, you've seen this from me before, whether town of Sebastopol, right, our constituents there, or Sturgeon Bay, I have that. And then I have just kind of a shortened timeline for what a November referendum looks like, whether the survey, whether the special sessions, different things with the board members, community members who might be interested in helping out, little unique nuggets about the Wisconsin referendum context, right? I have that underlined there, such as the district and people like Jake and me, we can inform people, but we can't ask them to vote a certain way. Whereas a staff member, general community member, and a board member, because you do have lives beyond the board, obviously, right? This is just a small part-time community service, really. You can advocate however you want. You can ask people to vote a certain way, et cetera, right? So just unique things sometimes that come up that administrators in Wisconsin cannot do that. I touched on the Penn Pulse newsletter, and I just have when those other board meetings fall, because I thought someone who was involved, whether they would come to that session or not, when you engage with them, might just be curious about when those board meetings are leading up to the election.
Will you send this electronically?
I absolutely will, yes, yeah, absolutely. We actually, Ann and I were talking, some of you probably will want to get it electronically, take a little screenshot on your phone and text it to someone, or forward an email or whatnot, but yeah, no, that is absolutely our plan. Literally, I made the final tweaks to this just probably a couple hours ago.
I like the way it looks.
Yeah, well, good, thank you. It's word heavy, but you expect that from me, right?
Well, but
And I know we've talked with, you know, Jake's looked at, and we've talked about in our board work sessions, how to get some of the budgetary information, right? And there's different visuals and whatnot, and, you know, what assumptions play into that. There was a point at which then I thought, well, maybe that gets to be too many pieces of paper, but we can certainly talk about how to share that. Thanks for coming. Other than that, maybe as we get ready to wrap up the meeting, maybe afterwards, because then we don't have to say names on camera. If maybe the board then just wants to share if you have particular people. I know a few of you have already told me I'm thinking of inviting so and so and so and so and so and so, but then Ann and I just kind of thought, well, if you know, if board members kind of share who they are, then you know, you're not double dipping on or sort of whatnot. Even though I'm sure a person would be offended if they were asked by 2 different board members. Other than that, Ann, am I missing anything from any of the stuff we reviewed? Jake, we got it all?
Good.
All right,
All right,
Mr. Wind, I think
we
we're
have a
ready.
motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Starr and a second by Commissioner Sprigga. All those in, or any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at